Welcome everybody. Hope you enjoyed the meditation. Is the microphones for recording?
Yes, there's no verification.
Okay. I learned a while back. First thing is to check and make sure that everyone can hear. Can everyone hear me in the back? Okay. Gave a Dhamma talk in Thailand a few years ago, and Thai is terrible. I was concerned about the Thai. It was a good training experience. I learned from it that my poor Thai skills were actually no problem because nobody could hear me. Apparently I didn't have the microphone close enough. So, I could hear me through the talk. So, well, that's a very uncertain thing. I was worried about my Thai, but that wasn't actually a problem. Well, I brought up the subject of uncertainty a bit in the guided meditation. It's something that the teachers of our lineage often refer to say in Thai, Jiwat Mainenon. Life is uncertain. Life is not certain. It's a frequent statement in uncertain times when planning. Something surprising happens. Jiwat Mainenon. Life is uncertain. I mentioned it in regard to in regard to our breath. So we're breathing. We often take our breath for granted as we go about our daily activities. But as I said, the masters will remind us sometimes what happens if the breath goes out and it doesn't come back in. There are many things we take for granted in life, and then there are many things we try to plan and fix down. We want to know what's going to happen later today, what's going to happen tomorrow. We'd like to plan out our futures as much as possible. But life is full of surprises. Sometimes we reflect on this. It's actually quite obvious if we think about it. We run into surprises all throughout our lives. But each time we run into something unexpected, it's a surprise again. I think one reflection on this is that even if the transitory phenomena of life are uncertain, how events unfold, we can't say. We can always remember our principles. And consider, are we still living by our principles? For me, as a faithful Buddhist, I often consider, I've gone forth from the home life There are many things in my life that are uncertain. People ask me sometimes, where do you live? Where are you going? Where will you be? And I don't know. It's quite common for the monastic life. But for all of us in general, these are uncertain things, in fact. But for me, as a faithful Buddhist, I'll reflect that whatever comes along, wherever I find myself, I have recourse to my principles to help me move forward. So I have the code of conduct for a monk given to us by the Buddha. Have the meditation practices. Guidance on good qualities to cultivate. This I find quite reassuring. Because these things can never be lost, they can never be taken away. To me, they seem like treasures that I have, that I can take with me wherever I go. And I think that if we want to live a spiritual life, perhaps this is the basic kind of orientation. Whether we're faithful Buddhists, or if we have faith in a different religion, or if we're on a path of inquiry, perhaps we can consider that our life is going well, and we're succeeding on that path if we're living in line with our own principles. According to the root teacher of our lineage, Ajahn Mun Bhuripañño, meditation master of Thailand of the 20th century. Our karma, in Pali we say karma, so Theravada Buddhism would often say karma in the original Pali. Our karma, our intentional actions, that is, are the only things we truly own. And it's often added that the spiritual qualities we develop also. The things that take with us wherever we go. Eventually in this life, the material wealth that we have and our relationships will all change. The many things we identify with will change. Our bodies grow and change. They age and they grow sick. As Ajahn Chah said, these bodies are not really our houses. We're not the owners of these houses. They're not our true homes. we only rent these houses. He said, nature will take back these houses, little by little. But according to the Buddhist religion, our hearts, our consciousness, or our mind, to say it in Thai, sometimes you use the term the heart, it's the jai. We'll continue on. And what it takes are the spiritual qualities that we've developed. And when it goes into the next life, the heart meets up with the results of our karma, our intentional actions. So some of us who have faith in rebirth might reflect on this, in terms of our priorities. What do we really want to invest our time in? And what's truly important to us? According to our scriptures, the Buddha was talking to, at one point was talking to a group of people who were consulting him for the first time. They didn't yet have faith in the Buddha. And they're asking him about which teachings to follow. How do you know which religion you should have faith in? What teachings you should follow? He gave them an answer that seemed very reasonable to them, and he went on to address the idea of rebirth. And he said to them, he said, you may not know if rebirth is real or not, if there really is a next life. But you can see here in the present that we have to experience the results of our own actions. That there actually really are consequences of good and bad actions. And he said, so if you consider, well, if we do that which is good, we don't do that which is bad, we'll live more comfortably in the present, in this life. And if there is a next life, and there are the consequences of good and bad actions in the next life, then we're covered that way as well. But with pragmatic teaching, always like. So this is my own way of thinking about a spiritual life. I think we want to be oriented by my principles. So living on a path of inquiry, what is truly good, and what is worth investing my time in, my energy in, what will really bring good results. So I'd like to offer that as a possible compass for the spiritual life, a path of inquiry into what should our principles be, and how do we live by them. And I think that if if we do that, then we can feel that, come what may, through uncertain times, we can take comfort in that we're continuing to live by our principles. I wonder if, quite a basic talk. Wonder if anyone should move into question and answer.
Sadhu, 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 anumodami.
Thank you, Liverpool. Yes, at this time, if you have any questions, you're welcome to ask questions.
Do you have faith in reincarnation?
Personally, I do, yes.
Has it helped you cope with the loss of loved ones?
Interesting question. I have to say, I'm not really sure that it has, actually. Yes, actually, I think some Buddhists do take, some people who have faith in reincarnation do take comfort in that, thinking that the loved ones live on. For me personally, I have to say, maybe it's just my personal inclination, my own personality. Sometimes I'm not sure where they are. but I do try to, what elders, I try to share merit and loving kindness with them, and perhaps just be supportive of them.
I'm reading a piece of Irish literature right now, and it's basically dealing with Catholicism, but they mention Buddhism as a religion, which is interesting because I always thought it was more a philosophy. So I'd like to know what it really is, because now I'm kind of confused. In Europe, do they call it one thing, and in America, we look at it as more of a philosophy? Not sure.
Okay, take this.
Actually, so the origin of this came from, there was, I forget exactly what it was called. I think they called it like the World Parliament of Religions or something, towards the end of the 19th century. And there was a delegation of Buddhist monks who were there, the representatives of all the major world religions. And the Buddhist monks who went there, they were trying to present Buddhism in a way which they thought would appeal to the Western mind. So they chose to say Buddhism is a philosophy, not a religion, because they wanted to distinguish Buddhism. They wanted to present a side of Buddhism that they thought would appeal to what they perceived as the more rationality and logic-oriented Western mind. And another element to this also was recognizing that the way the word religion has been defined in the West is based upon the religions which have dominated the West. So the way the term religion is normally defined in the Western world is very strongly rooted in Judeo-Christian concepts. And therefore the definition of religion in the Western world does not necessarily apply particularly well to Buddhism. In some ways, it works. In other ways, not really. So this is why there's been this tendency to say, like, is it a philosophy? Is it a religion? Ultimately, Buddhism is just Buddhism. And whether we call it a philosophy or a religion depends upon how you define those terms. More relevant is that Buddhism is a path of training the mind to attain awakening. And whether we call it a philosophy or religion is kind of semantics. Those are my thoughts anyway. What do you think?
No, I agree. I often think of the Buddhist teachings is a teaching about how to reduce suffering, and how to increase pleasure. So one of the wonderful things I think about Buddhism is that what's taught as being skillful and good also happens to align with what's pleasant in the long run. How to reduce suffering, increase pleasure, and have guideposts for what is good ethical action, and eventually be a complete release from suffering and awakening. So sometimes I refer to Buddhist teachings as religion. Sometimes I refer to it as a philosophy. It's actually
Could you also almost consider it a science because it just goes so deep into how the mind works and behavior and psychology and sociology. And I think it just gives answers that even medicine is even unable to do. And this happened how many years ago? And they're now finding that even with quantum physics, that a lot of the things that Buddha said can even be applied to yet answers that things we're finding today. So it's incredible. It just goes beyond the word. I think using a word of philosophy or religion minimizes the great expanse of what Buddhism is, as far as I can understand so far.
I think what you're expressing is that how impressive the Buddhist teachings can be. I think that for many of us, what we end up calling it is an expression of how we feel about it. So I think that, and also what aspects of the teachings you focus on. So they are quite psychological aspects of the teachings. Describe the different kinds of mental states we might have, for example, and how they relate to each other. There are also mystical aspects to the religion. But I think what you're pointing out is that the Buddhist teachings, if we study them, if we practice them, if we go to practice, we see that they're really quite wonderful. And so.
Just to follow up on your question, because I think about that a lot too. I've read a few books by like Eckhart Tolle, and it almost strikes me what he did is he sanitized Buddhism and kind of took out the Buddha part, if you will, and looked at it more from like a just straight philosophy and science. And that's what I kind of look at his work as, is he just kind of, I guess like made it more secular, if you will, secular. And that's really what his work is the whole Buddhist philosophy, basically, without Buddha, just principles. If that makes some sense. Because he talks about like being present in the moment, like the same kind of concepts that Buddhism talks about, just without the Buddha itself part. But all the teachings seem very similar.
Yeah, Buddhism without the Buddha is not Buddhism.
Well, but it's sort of like making it into science, like what you were saying. Like, it's like taking Buddhism and turning it into a science would be like what Eckhart Tolle, I think, kind of did.
And I should be honest, I've never read any Eckhart Tolle. Have you read any Eckhart Tolle?
No.
Yeah, so I actually don't really know anything about him, except that he had some pretty far out mystical experiences, which some people think aligns with the Buddhist concept of awakening.
Yes,
But
he
that's
talks about that a lot.
I can say.
Being in the present moment, like all those.
The now. It's
The now, he calls it.
It's the
Being
now.
in the now.
Yeah, I can't comment on Eckhart Tolle just because I'm not really familiar with what he said.
Good for me.
Imagine this is a topic that's in modern America. This is quite common for people coming to Buddhism to really identify with what might consider to be the scientific aspects of religion. So maybe talking about another aspect might be actually worthwhile. Consider, for example, consider the Buddha as the founder of the religion, the one who gives the teachings. And it's said in Ajahn Chah once said, he said that before you drink the water, you should know the source. My own teacher interpreted that as meaning that if we were involved with Buddhism, we should know who the Buddha is, and if we find benefit in teachings, we should have some gratitude. One of the teachings of Buddhism is we have a discourse on the 38 highest blessings, and the very first set of blessings is not to associate with fools, but to associate with the wise, and to worship that which is worthy of worship. And I know when I first became involved in Buddhism, I wasn't so interested in worship, personally. But I found over the years that the practice of worship can be quite inspiring and nourishing. So I oftentimes do a meditation on the qualities of the Buddha himself, actually, as part of my practice. I find that quite inspiring as well, energizing the practice, the appreciation for it. So that's something, something maybe for some of us to look into, try something. If we've really been attracted to the scientific aspects or the psychological aspects of Buddhism, well, what if we gave something like that a try? If we give devotion and worship a little bit of a
try. I was just curious, the follow-up from one of your answers on Monk Chat last night. Is the Buddha still alive? And you said, as the meditation masters in Thailand had expressed, yes. So I was curious because I know that some people in specifically what I understand Theravada Asia, they'll almost pray to Lord Buddha. I don't know if they're expecting a response from Buddha or from kind of like mystical, celestial, Buddhist aligned forces. Was that anything that ever came up in your experience in Thailand?
Yes. It is quite a common part of Thai Buddhism, as I understand it, yes, from my experience there. And even the meditation masters as well. Some people find this, maybe a lot of Westerners find this hard to relate to. It is quite common in Thai Buddhism. If you need some help in your life, you pray to the master Ajahn Chah, for example, or to the Buddha himself. It's an interesting topic in Theravada Buddhism because we don't find anything in the scriptures related to this at all, as far as I've ever seen. And I went on to answer what I meant by saying that I believe that the Buddha is still alive. Right. It's that according to the meditation masters of Thailand, when we attain enlightenment, the heart goes on in Nibbana, and so it's actually still alive. Nibbana is the deathless, and the heart still has life, but it's not a life limited to the body like we have here in samsara. Whether it's by Buddhist doctrine, we can be reborn as human beings again, or can be reborn as animals, for example. But when the heart attains release and goes to Nibbana, it's limitless and free. And in fact, it can still come back into samsara and help beings that it has karmic connections with.
Can you please, we just said it can still come back
and help beings, people that it has karmic connections with.
So you can selectively come in and out of samsara then?
Yes. So I have a great deal of faith in some of the teachers who I've heard this from. So I can't say that I know if it's true, but it is a common feature of Thai Buddhism. And so I was asked, do I believe that this is true? Last night on Monk Chat. So yeah, I do believe it's true.
No, I very much appreciate that. It wasn't in line with my understanding, my very, very limited, I should admit, understanding of the Theravada framework of what happens when an arahat, their body passes away, but very fond of that response.
Well, in the sutras, the Buddha, he points out two main wrong views One is the wrong view that an awakened being continues to exist after death. The other is the wrong view that they cease to exist after death. So both of these are wrong.
I can understand that in some time. It's more that I just figured that they're kind of, that when an arhat passes away, they're absorbed in nirvana in a way that it's unshakable and unmovable. So almost that they wouldn't have any perception anymore of the world of form and samsara.
Well,
But I doubt that's, yeah.
The way the Buddha talks about it is that the concepts of existence and non-existence are completely irrelevant to an awakened being. They have no relevance whatsoever. So usually unawakened beings will relate to everything in terms of either existing or not existing. So people ask these questions like, does the Buddha still exist? That's already the wrong question because that question doesn't make any sense. So whether you say yes, no, maybe, both, neither, it's all a wrong answer because the question was already the wrong question. So, and there's ways of answering the question in any way you want and justifying that explanation any way you want. But it doesn't change the fact that the question itself is meaningless. It's kind of asking, what color is that sound?
Isn't that probably a koan or something like that?
Well, koans are actually meant to break our logical thought chains. They're meant to break us out of habitual thinking. So they're not necessarily meant to be logical. They're actually meant to break us out of our limited thought patterns.
My point there was that not exactly meaningless, it just doesn't make sense.
Anyway, there's actually an interesting sutta where a monk was asking the Buddha whether awakened beings continue to exist or not after death. And the Buddha says, you don't even know what an awakened being is right now when there's one right in front of you. How can you ask what they're like after death? Anyway, it looks like Joe has a question.
Thank you, Venerable. You spoke in your talk about good and bad deeds, and it reminded me of the Buddha's teaching on the lump of salt in the freshwater lake, and I was just curious about in your own practice how you've experienced that teaching, and like how the practice helps you relate to the salt in your life, and what practices you use to cultivate freshwater reserves, to use the metaphor.
Okay. Well, if I remember correctly, that metaphor is about the karmic results of bad deeds. Okay, so if the mind is expansive, then the result of a bad deed could be hardly felt at all. Okay, let me make sure I'm on the same page with you. Okay, so that this is just as if you were to drop a grain of salt into a large body of water, it wouldn't really alter the taste of it. But if you put salt into a small amount of water, you could taste the salt in it. And if our mind is not expansive, then we would, if the result of a bad deed ripens, then we'd feel the result full on. Well, I think that one way that I might experience something similar to this in my day-to-day life is that I find that if I've been keeping up my practice, and I'm in a relatively calm place, the heart is more kind of relaxed and calm, then when I run into difficulties in different situations, they don't bother me as much. It's quite a straightforward point, but it's quite an important point to remember, I think. I've heard many times from practitioners that they've gotten away from their practice sometimes. Sometimes the practice falls away. This has happened in my own life as well. It's easy to get busy with many things in life, and we might have the aspiration to practice some meditation every day, for example. We might find ourselves going for a long period of time without practicing. if circumstances aren't right, or if if our priorities kind of change over time. But I've heard from some people, and well, I went through a terrible time. Something terrible happened. A family member was sick, or they were sick, or they lost their job, and they had a very difficult time dealing with it emotionally. And then they'd say on their own, I know the reason was that I let my practice go. If I kept up my meditation practice, it would have been a lot easier to deal with. And I think it's a good point to bear in mind, when we go through the various changes of life and thinking about our priorities. We all have to eventually deal with old age, disease, and death, even. And the meditation masters in Thailand will often kind of point out to their disciples, if you, how are you going to deal with that when it comes time? If some of the disciples said, I don't have time to keep up my practice, I'm doing this or I'm doing that. If you're not keeping up your practice in these circumstances, how are you going to practice when you're going through something really difficult? Like old age, disease, and death. So it's a point I often like to make, that our meditation practice is very valuable, it's very precious, and so we want to try to make sure to prioritize it.
Any questions from online?
There's a few comments. There's
Just
someone,
questions. We
Okay.
don't have time to go through all the
very
comments,
good.
but if there's
Then,
actual questions, we can take questions.
no, mainly comments about religion versus philosophy.
During the meditation, I remember you brought up that the feeling of restlessness, which I experience sometimes during the practice. And I think what happens is, I'll be going back and forth between like worrying about the future, and then realizing that my mind has wandered, and then I'll get stuck in a loop about start criticizing, like the fact that I may be wandering too much and things like that. And I just wanted to maybe ask what the best way, I guess, to bring kindness in that moment to more quickly maybe bring back my attention to the breath. Yeah.
Well, I think that a common problem in meditation practice is being kind of judgmental of ourselves. I noticed that this came out kind of in relief in living in communities in Thailand, Thai communities. It seemed like those of us, the Americans and the Europeans and the Australians, kind of we criticize ourselves a little bit more than the Thais would. This was something valuable in their culture. They took it easier on themselves, and than a lot of us Westerners did. So I think it's something that we can bring to bear to kind of a whole life. You mentioned having some kindness to dealing with, interacting with yourself and with distractions in meditation practice. And I imagine that the question maybe reflects an attitude that many of us have in our lives in general, in relation to we might see it as our shortcomings or difficulties that we have in life, and we might want a reorientation on that, a little bit more kind of kindness to ourselves in general in life, and then that will kind of show up in our meditation practice as well as in other areas of our lives as well. It's simply the nature of the mind to be easily distracted. Even the most renowned meditation masters reported tremendous difficulty in the beginning of meditation practice. Ajahn Chah was one of the most highly esteemed meditation masters of the 20th century in Thailand. Said that in the early days when he was trying to learn to meditate, he sometimes broke down into tears. He found it so difficult to figure out how do I do this? What is it I should be doing? But then he later pointed out to one of his Western disciples. He says, one of the things about all this is suffering going along on the path. All the difficulties I had, and all the difficulties you're having. He said, every one of them will bring you wisdom.
Thank you.
So we can end with 3 more sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu.